GeeksforGeeks has a challenge for you, the 390 challenge. Choose what you want to learn in 2024 and aim to complete at least 90% of the course in the next 90 days. And if you do that, you get back 90% of what you paid for the course. We believe you can do that. Now all you got to do is commit to your success. Commit with Geeks4Geeks.
So I think we are live now. So hi everyone. My name is Sumit Kapoor, and today I'll be talking about. So we are doing this series of JavaScript, React, and Node interview question series. So last two sessions we covered basically the questions which are generally asked on the JavaScript side, like the implementation questions, the theoretical questions, and certain fundamental concepts. We also try to cover those fundamental concepts. In this session, we are going to cover the React specific questions, like what are the things which are generally evaluated on the React side. We'll also parallelly talk about certain general front-end questions, like not in terms of React, but those are general front-end questions. So those also we are going to talk about. So today and next Friday, basically, we are going to talk about these two sessions. We are going to talk about the general or basically the nuanced questions that are asked on the React side. So let me just quickly share my screen and then we'll get started. Yeah. So entire screen. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible to everyone. So we'll start with the. I hope everyone can see my screen. So what we're going to talk about is what is React first. How in a normal interview, so one can ask like what is React and how is it different from other framework. So React is nothing but it's a JavaScript library. It's not a framework. It's a JavaScript library that is used for building interactive user interfaces. Now, since it's a library, it's not a framework. So always remember that it's a library, not a framework. Not a framework. Unlike other frameworks that we have, like Angular was a framework. Angular is a framework, not was. Similarly, your Backbone.js, Knockout.js, those are your frameworks, whereas React is your library. Now, when we talk about library, so in framework you have a predefined model, like you follow there is a data flow that you follow in a framework. Like MVC could be the data flow, like you have data flowing from model to view to controller. Now React does not have any MVC kind of a concept. It is just a view layer. So what is React? React is just a library which is used for building user interfaces, and it does not have MVC. It does not have MVC. It basically is a view layer. Now, what do we mean by view layer? In the view layer, we basically create components with which user interacts and be able to with which user interacts and certain JavaScript actions are performed, right? Whereas in MVC, what used to happen, like we had a model, we have a view, then we have a controller, then we have a model. So there was a data flow that was assigned. Here, since everything is a view only, so what do we mean by view here is everything is a component. So view is a top layer thing, and then you have an abstraction of component. So you can say everything in the React is a view. So that's why it's a view library. It does not talk about model and controller part of things, whereas the other frameworks used to talk about model, view, controller. Now here, since it's a view library, here the data flow is also it's also unidirectional. We can do a bidirectional data flow also, but you can largely say that the data flow from parent to child. So data flow from parent component to child component. Whereas in other frameworks like Angular, your data flow was like you had model data was flowing usually from view to controller and controller to model. That's how the flow used to be in the other frameworks like Angular, Backbone, and all. Whereas over here, since everything is component, so the data flows from parent component to the child component, and it's a view library, as I mentioned. So these are the few things which we learned about React, that it is used for building user interfaces. It's a library, not a framework. Then these were the frameworks. This is not a framework, as I said. It does not follow an MVC kind of an architecture that the other frameworks like Angular used to follow, and it's a view library, right? And the data flow is like parent to child, right? But you can also do, there is a catch here. You can also do vice versa also, like you can pass the data from child to parent component using callbacks, right? We'll see what callbacks is, but just now, just for the definition sake of purposes, like if you are asked in an interview what is React and how is it different from other frameworks, you can answer a few things like it's a view, it's a library used for building user interfaces. It's not a framework. Again, it's not a framework, it's a library. Second point is it does not have any MVC kind of a data flow. Since it's a view, your data flow generally is in unidirectional format, like from your parent to child component, and it's not vice versa, like from not you can do via callbacks, but generally it's a parent to child data flow that you pass. If you want to do a bidirectional, so if there's a trick question like can we do a bidirectional data flow like from child to parent, yes, we can do it using callbacks. So it allows bidirectional data flow, bidirectional data flow from child to parent using callbacks, right? So these are a couple of things which basically you can explain while if you get the question like what is React and how is it different from other frameworks. What else we can talk about here? So React is generally used for those applications which are very UI, which are very interaction heavy, right? Or which are very interaction heavy and uses a lot of similar type of UI elements at multiple places, right? So React is preferred for applications, uh, React is preferred for applications which are very much UI heavy, user interaction heavy, which are very much user interaction heavy. Now, what do we mean by very much user interaction heavy? So let's take an example of any B2C application. There are lots of B2C applications that we have. Like we have a lot of, we have Facebook as a very B2C application where user can create posts, user can upload pictures, user can also remove pictures, add a lot of things, right? So that is an example of which is again built on React. Then we have Airbnb, then we have all these whatever B2C application that user interacts, like when you want to book something, IRCTC, not IRCTC, I'm not sure which framework do they use, but any application that generally has a lot of user interaction that can be built using React, and React should be the preferred choice for those applications. Why? Because it decouples everything from MVC flow to just a view flow, and you don't have any abstraction, and you just have to care about your parent to child relationship, and that is how your data would also flow. So it is generally kept at that level. Now, it also provides, since React is very huge library, it has an ecosystem of library, like React Router is one library which is used for routing, creation of routing. Then we have for data storage, we have Redux, which is again an external library. We also have Context, which is again an internal thing of React, like it's part of the React API itself. It is not an external thing, it is part of React API. Whereas your Redux and React Router is an external thing. You have to install them through the package managers called npm and yarn, right? Now we'll talk about what is npm and yarn, but yeah, so these are the things which you can, if you are asked like what is React and how is it different from other frameworks, so this is what you can answer in terms of React. Any let me see if there are any questions on chat or any comments. We have got, so so far no comments. So what do you now this was about like basics of React. Now what are the kind of components that we have? So before we move to the components, so you need to have, like, there are a couple of prerequisites that you need to have when you are building a React application. One is you need to have a Node application. You need to have a Node installed in your machine. Node.js should be there, like version you can use 16 and above, because that is what is going on at the moment. Once you have Node installed, Node will automatically bake in your npm, which is Node package manager, which can be used to install a lot of third-party applications or third-party libraries or third-party utilities, which will be used when you are coding or when you are building any React specific application. Similarly, you can also have an alternative of yarn. Now, what is the difference is like npm is much mature package manager, whereas yarn was, again, I think was launched by Facebook only. I'm not sure the company name, but that is irrespective. But yarn is not that mature, and since it's a new, npm has a much better ecosystem and much better support as compared to yarn. Yarn is also picking up, but largely the preferred choice, it depends what kind of commands are similar, but the functionality is similar. It's just the algorithm which they use for pulling the package from the artifactories might be different. So in inner working might be different or might be same, and I've not explored in that. But these are two package manager. But npm is much more older and much mature, whereas yarn is much newer and is picking up slowly and steadily. Whereas npm would be the preferred choice. You would get npm whenever you install Node module. You have to install yarn if you want to use yarn as a package manager. The commands roughly remain same. So if you want to install, let's say, a library which is in a development mode, you need to create a, when you are basically creating an application which is supposed to be a React application, you need to have a package.json file, and this is how your package.json file looks like. This is just a very brief version of package.json file. You will have a lot of other things like dev dependencies and production and normal dependencies. I'm calling those normal dependencies because those are used on your production side, and your dev dependencies are used on your development mode. So in the dev dependencies, if you want to install a package using npm, you would be doing npm I stands for install, and then you would be using this flag, which is --save -dev, and then you would specify the name of the library that you want to install. Let's say we want to install React Router or React DOM or React Router or something like that, right? Router. So you would be installing it like this, and this, whenever you do --save dev, this will push the dependency on the development dependency, not on the production dependency. Whereas if you want to install this dependency in the production mode, you don't have to specify the --save -dev flag. You can easily do it using npm I, then the package name, which is React Router. Right, so that's about how you install. That is about the kind of package managers we have at our disposal, which we can use for creating the React applications. Now, what are the different kinds of components that we have in React? We have basically, before we jump onto the components, we'll talk about what kind of concepts React is based upon. React uses a couple of things like so one very important or one core concept is the concept of virtual DOM, which means just give me 1 second. Mummy. Sorry for the disturbance. So we'll talk about the very important concept, which is very important from the interview perspective also, like what is virtual DOM. So virtual DOM is nothing but it's a replica of your real DOM. What now? I think if you have attended my JavaScript series also, in JavaScript I explained in very much depth like what is DOM. DOM is nothing but a document object model. So whenever you write your HTML, it is converted and it is first parsed and then converted into a DOM, document object model, which is a tree-like structure where you have nodes. Like you have an HTML node, then you have head node, then you have body node, and so on and so forth. So virtual DOM is nothing but it's a replica of that document object model, which is actually persisted onto the UI. Now, when you open any website, you are basically interacting with the DOM. You're not interacting with your JavaScript basically interacts with the DOM. Now React is, since it's a wrapper, it's a library of JavaScript only. So it interacts with the DOM. It directly interacts. It does not directly interacts with your real DOM. It first interacts with virtual DOM. So virtual, we are saying it's a in-memory representation of the DOM. It does not exist. It does not exist in your browser. It does not. It is actually an in-memory representation. It's an in-memory representation of your DOM. Now it will contain everything. It will contain it will contain all your nodes like head node, body node, your H1 to H6 or whatever structure you have created for your application. It will contain all those nodes. Now, when it will contain all the structure, so what happens is what React does is React, since it is not interacting with the real DOM, which is slightly an expensive operation, which most of the frameworks like jQuery used to refresh the entire DOM even if there is a change at the leaf level. Since I'm saying it's a tree-like structure, so the structure would be like this: like HTML would be there, then you have to head would be there, then body would be there. Inside head there would be a lot of other tags. If we want to create the structure like this, inside head you can have link tag, then you can have meta tag, and so on and so forth. Similarly, in the body you can have h1 to h6, then paragraph tag, and so on, right? These are the tags that you would be having. This is the kind of tree-like structure you would be having, right? Now React is interacting with this tree-like structure. So React is interacting with this tree-like structure, which is in memory of it, not actually with the DOM which the browser has created. So that is the one advantage, that it interacts with the in-memory representation of it, because in-memory representation you can traverse it fast. And now let's say we have changed the content, or we have changed the inner text of paragraph. Let's say paragraph was having hello world. We have just changed this to hello world, hello GeeksforGeeks learners, hello GFG learners. We've just changed this one, right? Now, other frameworks like jQuery used to refresh the entire DOM, right? Which was a very costly and expensive operation. Now, what React came up with? React came up with the concept of virtual DOM, in which these changes are not persisted directly to the real DOM. These changes are first persisted to the virtual DOM. Now, only this node has been changed. Since only this node has been changed, what React will do is React will has a reconciliation, or basically a diffing algorithm, which basically compares what all has been changed. It will compare virtual DOM versus real DOM, what has actually been changed. Based on that, it will try to update in the reconciliation step. Since it goes phase by phase, in the reconciliation step, it will try to persist the changes which has been modified, in the virtual DOM. So it will try to persist those changes. Once the changes have been persist in the reconciliation step, your DOM would be updated. Now, since everything is happening in memory, and it is getting persisted at the last step when you have identified what all has been changed, that is why it is much faster, and you are only updating the node which has been modified, not updating the entire tree, which other frameworks used to, whereas the other framework used to update the entire DOM tree. So that is one big advantage that you have with React, whereas with other frameworks you didn't have that kind of an advantage. Now, since this is happening, as I said, this is happening in memory. So you are actually not. So one thing which I forgot mentioning. So React has a package called React DOM that interacts with the real DOM. This package interacts with the real DOM. Now it has a couple of methods like React DOM.hydrate, React DOM.render. Now, one question that can be asked, like, how does React DOM interact with React DOM? Since it's a package since we are saying that this is the package that interacts with the real DOM, so one question can be asked, like, how does React DOM interact with the actual DOM, right? So it has a render method. Now the syntax has been slightly changed. You have to first create the root. Now, so the syntax has been changed slightly. So what the syntax is, you create the root element, create root. Inside the create root, you have to pass the ID of the element that you want, for which you want to create the root. And inside this, you will first pass the container. So we can check over here, like React DOM.render method. So once you open this, you have the render method here. So we'll go here. So here, if you see, it takes the element. So this is the official documentation of Facebook. So this is the element and this is the container. Now element you need to pass. So what element do you want to render, right? And then you would need to pass the container. Now the container would be like in which you want to wrap. So let's say you have the HTML structure. In that you have a so let's say you have this HTML structure. Let's create an HTML file, index.html. You have this HTML structure. Inside this, you created a container, and you mentioned the ID to be root. Now here you want to append all the React stuff that you are trying to create, all the component stuff that you are trying to create. Now, when you want to append here all the component stuff that you want to embed in React, so what you will simply do is you will use this method. You will first pass the element. You'll first pass the element. So here, the example of the element would be like 1 second. So here you have the root, and here then you are trying to basically render. You will specify the component. Element means component here. Which component do you want to try to you are trying to render? You will pass the component here, and the second argument it will take is basically this where you want to embed this React component code. So you want to embed this React component code inside this root container. So you will just specify document.getElement by ID, and you will pass the ID of that component. So that's how you basically interact with the real DOM, and this is the package you use for interacting with the real DOM, right? Which is called React DOM. So that's about React DOM, and that is how you can interact with the real DOM using the render method. There are a couple of methods which you use for hydrating also. Like there is a hydrate method also, which is generally used for when you are doing a server-side rendering, but we'll talk about what is server-side rendering. But yeah, till here, let me see if there are any questions or anything. Anyone has posted anything on the chat? No, I don't see any questions. So let's move on to the next part. Yeah, that's about the React DOM. Now we've gone through the important concepts of virtual DOM, what it does, what is diffing, what is reconciliation, how does React DOM interact with the real DOM. Now comes the important topic of so I talked about this SSR. So there are two terms. One is SSR, and the other one is CSR. So what is SSR? What is CSR? So SSR means for server-side rendering. Server-side rendering. And CSR means for client-side rendering. So what does server-side rendering do, and what is client-side rendering do? So server-side rendering means you have a server. Now you have a server returning you some HTML skeleton, which has some CSS and some JavaScript embedded in it. Skeleton plus CSS and plus some JavaScript embedded on it. Now, when your page is getting rendered, so when your page gets rendered, right, you can return certain HTML stuff, and then inside that you can embed when you are returning the skeleton, you can embed your JavaScript, right? Embed your JavaScript bundle that would be created by your React, right? You would embed those JavaScript bundle that would be created by React, and then browser will start parsing it, and then as soon as it encounters JavaScript, it will start downloading and then executing it, right? That's how your generally execution is done by browser whenever it is dealing with any of the library or any of the framework that we are building upon. So server-side rendering basically your server returns this. Now server can return a lot of things. It can return a JSON response. It can return you a HTML page. It can return you all these three assets also. But here it is returning you these things. When it is returning you these things, what happens is when it is returning you these things, when your page is getting rendered, right? So at that time, a lot of activities happen, which as a naive user, you don't know what all activities are happening. So generally, SEO rankings and all, and Google bots try to read your page content, and based on that, it tries to rank your page. So Google bots tries to read your page content when the page is getting loaded. When the page is getting loaded, Google bots will try to read the page content, and there you will pass, since it if you are not doing server-side rendering, the page would be blank, right? So the Google bots would not be able to infer anything out of it. When you have certain things part of the page which is already available, so when they will find that there is a skeleton already created, now there is already a skeleton, so it will try to read the meta content and all. Based on that, it will try to rank your page. Now, so server-side rendering, you understood, right? It is spitting out your HTML skeleton plus CSS plus JS embedded in it, like in the form of link tags, in the form of script tags. So that's how your server-side rendering works, where your server is returning your skeleton. And its advantages is like it's very important for SEO. And even if, let's say, you want to improve your application load time and all, you can do all the heavy lifting or all the API expensive or time-consuming API calls at the server, because those would be much faster. And then render the page. Basically, whatever data you've collected, push it into your HTML skeleton and then return the page. So that way, your SEO rankings advantages are like your SEO gets a very high. Your SEO ranks improves when you are using server-side rendering, because you can provide keywords in the meta tag and define all those keywords which you feel your business can be searched through. So it improves your organic search, and it improves your SEO ranking, like organically. You don't have to pay anything to the search engine provider, right? That which is usually done through SEM. Whereas in client-side rendering, what you do is you just return the bundle. Now that bundle is downloaded is usually a JavaScript bundle, which is again transpiled and then converted into the code. Now, when you return the bundle which is done downloaded and then executed, right? So at this time, there are no SEO advantages in client-side rendering, because everything is happening at the browser level, right? Browser will first download. Browser won't get any skeleton as such. In client-side rendering, browser won't get any skeleton as such, so it has to first download and then create the skeleton. By the time it creates the skeleton, Google bots are finished reading and they don't have any content to rank your page, right? So generally, usually people avoid using client-side rendering if they want to increase their visibility through organic means, right? So that's about your client-side rendering. So now there are lots of things like how the code is converted, because browser understands your HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It does not understand like React code, right? So you use transpilers for those. Like Babel is one such transpiler, which is used for converting your React code into your JavaScript code. So one such example is like whenever let's say you create a class-based component like this, class home extends react.component, right? Inside this class-based components, render is a mandatory method that you have to define. Inside this render method, you return some JSX, which is h1 hello world. When you do this, what happens is, now internally when you pass this code to the Babel, what Babel will do is Babel will use React as a reference, and then you will use this syntax like react.createElement. So if you remember in document object model, we used to use document.create model kind of a create element kind of a syntax, right, for creating a DOM node like a div or a span or any other tag, right? So that's how you do it in React. So right. So internally, this React.createElement gets converted into document.createElement, right? But when Babel is given you this piece of code, it will convert it into basically React.createElement, then these tags h1 hello world, something like this, and then it is executed by the browser. Since it has your React CDN code, it has your React specific code also, where it can interpret when we call React.createElement what should be actually called. So there would be some definition written for create element which would be calling this wrapper. And one more thing I missed adding, React follows declarative style of coding rather than imperative style of coding, where so declarative, what is the difference between declarative and imperative? Declarative means you don't write a lot of verbose code. So this is more of a declarative style of coding. You're telling that there's an h1 you have to declare, right? Similarly, if you want to do it in JavaScript, what you have to do is you have to create first h1 element. Once you have created an h1 element, you will assign it to some variable. After you've assigned to it some variable, you will add heading dot inner HTML, or inner text you can simply define. You will write hello world. Same thing, you have to do it like this in JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, right? So this is more of a imperative style of coding rather than a declarative one. So it follows, your JavaScript follows declarative. Sorry, JavaScript follows imperative and React follows declarative style of coding. So that's about declarative and imperative style of coding. Then we are done with this part also. Now we'll talk about the types of component. So we have talked about the basics, like what kind of questions are asked. Now people can ask you like what kind of components do we have in React. So we have two kinds of components. One is class based. Second one is functional. In this session, we'll talk about just the class-based components. We'll not talk about functional components. We'll talk about functional components in the next section, next series or next interviews section of this series. So in the class-based, this is the example of your class-based components. So now there are a couple of lifecycle methods that we have in React. Now there are phases in which your class-based components is created, right? Now the phases of class-based components are first is mounting phase, in which your component is mounted. Second is your update phase, in which your component is updated. Third is your unmounting phase, in which if your component is done executing, it will be unmounted. So these are the three phases. You have mounting phase, update phase, and unmounting phase. In mounting phase, your component will be updated. It will be mounted on the screen, will be shown on the UI. Now I'll define the methods parallelly also. Like the methods that are called on the mounting phase, like so you have a render method. So there used to be a method called component will mount, which is now deprecated, not part of React anymore, but it used to be there in React older version like 14 or so. Now there is one more method like get derived state from props and component did mount. And basically your constructor method is also there, which is also called, right? In update phase, whenever you do any update, you will obviously be re-rendering your component. Then you will be having again this get derived state from props. This is a static method. Then you will have component did update. So there was one more method which is now deprecated, which is called component will receive props. Then component will update. Again, this is also I think did update got deprecated. Will update is still there. I think I just need to check whether. But yeah, these were the methods. Then get derived get snapshot from. It's snapshot from update. Not sure about this one. So yeah, these are the couple of major. So should component update is also one method, which is also called at the update phase. And at the unmounting phase, you only have one method, which is component will unmount, which means when the component is destroyed. Right? Here at the mounting phase, your component will be created. Update phase, you are interacting with the component. In the unmounting phase, your component will be destroyed. Right. So these are the three phases. Now, if you want to avoid rendering, let's say if you have these are the methods, you should remember these methods. You don't have to remember them because class-based components are no longer used in React. It's just a way to create a component in React, but it is no longer used. So you should know the phases of lifecycle instead of knowing the entire methods. But yeah, if you know them, then that is good. If you don't know them, that is fine, but you should know mounting, update, and unmounting, slight bit of methods, because when you start working in the organization, you might encounter code which is using class-based component, not using functional components. Right, so these were the phases of the lifecycle method, and these are the methods in the lifecycle methods. Now there can be questions like which method is called on the server side. method is called on both server and client. Right now, all these methods that you see are called on client only. But there used to be one method which was called on server also, which was called component will mount, which has been deprecated now, not being continued in the latest version of React. So this was called on both client and server. Which method is ideal for calling the API? Ideal for calling the API. So you have component did mount is the ideal place where you can call the API, because it is called immediately after the first render. Whenever your component is rendered for the first time, after that your component did mount method is called, and this is the method which is ideal for calling the APIs. How can you prevent re-rendering of the React components using lifecycle method? So this question is like, how can you prevent re-rendering of the like whenever you, so how does component re-render? Component try to observe your state changes, right? So there are two types of variables. I think we didn't talk about that. There are two types of variables. One is state variable, and the other one is your prop variable. So when we say data is unidirectional, so we are passing data via props in the form of props. So let's say we created this hello world component, a home component, where we are returning. So this part of the code is called JSX, which is called JavaScript XML. Now we return JSX only from one component. Now let's say this component, now we move this JSX from this component to some other component. We also create that. Extends render done. So we're going to destructure it. So now we'll have access to this object. Inside this object, we are going to access the content. So this is the content that is being returned. So we'll use curly braces to render the content. So this is how you will render the content. And this is how you, no, don't save this. Let's not save this. So now from this component, we'll try to call this component, which is hello world. So what we'll do is, since this is JavaScript XML, so we'll create this component, which is whose name is hello world. We'll call this hello world component. In this, we'll pass the content. So the content would be what? Content would be basically your this string. And we'll close this. Now, hello world, if you see, is not a valid HTML tag, right? It's not a valid HTML tag. That's why we are saying it's a JavaScript XML. It's not a valid HTML tag. This will be converted to some, with this kind of a code by Babel, right? It will be converted to this kind of a code, which is react.createElement something, right? So it's not a valid JavaScript code. So it's not a valid HTML tag. So that's why it's called JSX, right? And the way content is nothing but a props. So it is being used as a props here. Now we can also create state variables. Now generally to simplify, React observes state changes. On basis of state changes, whenever there is a state change, it tries to re-render itself. On basis of state changes, it tries to re-render itself. When it tries to re-render itself, it basically calls a method just to take an approval. Should it re-render or should it not re-render? So what is that method? It's called should component update. So it takes the approval of this method called should component update. Now what does this method do under the hood? This method basically returns you a Boolean value, which is either true or false. If it's a true, which means it will cause an update, it will cause a re-render. If it's a false, it won't cause a re-render. So this method you can use to control the re-rendering of the React component based on some certain conditions or based on certain upcoming props. So that's how you can control or prevent re-rendering of the React component using lifecycle method. Then these are a couple of things which I wanted to talk about React and basically the class-based component. Now there is a design principle which we use called higher order components. Now what is higher order components? Now higher order components, if you remember, I don't know if you people know higher order functions or not. So what higher order functions are, you define a function, greet. In that you pass one more function as an argument. So since JavaScript we say that functions are first class object. In the greet you pass one more function as an argument, which is some fn, and from fn you try to invoke that. So this is nothing but you can define your fn here also. So let me just correct this function fn. So that's how you've defined it. You've defined this also. You'll call greet. In this you'll pass fn as a callback, and then so this is your higher order function. This is your higher order function, and fn is your callback function, right? Function. Now this was about your callback function. So similarly, same inspiration you have with the higher order components. So now what is higher order components? A component that returns in another component from itself is called a higher order component. So usually the syntax is like, let's say you want to add some repetition, right? So let's say you create a component class hello or class heading extends React.component. So this you will return one more component here, class subheading extends. I'm just giving you an example, React.component. So this component here we can have some render method which will return some heading like h1, h2. Right. So what we are doing here is we have the class heading component from which we are trying to return one more component which is of type subheading. Now when we call heading, since it returns one more component, so we can assign that heading to some variable or something. So what we will do is we'll export this like this, export default heading. I'll talk about what is named export and default export. So why are we using default keyword here? We'll talk about that, but this is how generally you use this. So whenever you're exporting this, now whenever you export this, you will get this component is being returned. Now instead of calling, so now if you want to call this component, so basically whenever you want to add a reusability aspect to your code, you can use higher order components because it returns a new component with some modified properties. Here you can modify the properties that are being passed to this heading component and be able to leverage that using this. So this is basically a reusable part of your code, right? So this is basically a reusable part of code. This is how you can create a reusability in your code. So that is what your higher order components do. Now we will talk about this. So we did export default, right? So there is one more way of doing it. Like you can just simply do export instead of export default. You could have done this also. Export heading, export class like this also was perfectly fine. So we saw what is the difference between default versus this is called like default export and named export. What is the difference? In the default export, you specify the default keyword. Now default export is there is one default export allowed per file. You can only do one default export per file. Whereas what is named export, when you don't specify when you don't specify any default or any other keyword apart from export, that is called your named export. You can do multiple named export per file. So that's the difference between your default and named export. So this is what can be asked from the React perspective and React class-based components perspective. So since we are almost very close to the time, so I'll try to wrap up now. So let me see if there are any questions or anything that anyone has asked or wants me to clarify. I don't see any questions. So I think I'm done from my side of the content that I wanted to deliver today. Covered most of the aspect of the React, like what kind of questions are asked in React, what are the different features we have, what are the how to answer each and every theoretical questions. We'll also do some practical questions, like in the next session we'll try to create a stopwatch component. We'll try to create a couple of custom hooks. We'll first talk about the theory of functional components, and we'll do a couple of 2-3 problems on the React side. So thanks everyone for watching this session on the React interview questions. And feel free to write your questions in the comments after this live session gets completed. I'll be able to respond back to you on the comment section. Thank you.